we still have to understand that like, just because you have something to say to that audience doesn't mean that everybody's going to care.
You've got that baseline understanding, Maurice. Now, once you've got that, how do you actually get started? What different data sources are you using? Walk me through that.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, when I get started, I'm the type of person who is in the channels digging into all the data. I like to look at, everywhere from my process is looking at, all right, what's the people who are interacting with the business, people who like retargeting audiences, looking at how they're interacting with the channel already, looking at your ICP targeting. We talked about that before, but how are they interacting with how they are interacting on Facebook? What are they doing on LinkedIn? Like and in terms of like search types things, like what are really just digging into the platforms, looking to see, are we hitting those people? Are we getting correct touches on, the right businesses? Are we aligned that way in terms of marketing? I find a lot of times like we don't want to target this company with 2 people. We don't want to spend. And granted, that's some businesses. That's the bread and butter for the businesses I'm at. Just making sure they're aligned. But getting started, I look at retargeting, ICP targeting, and your target account lists and ABM type plays.
Hana, what about you? And let's try not to jump into ABM versus ICP targeting, because we're going to have like 4 questions on that. So not trying to steal your thunder.
Yeah, no problem. I'm not ready to get into that violence yet. Mark wanted violence for this.
I did not say that. Yes.
I'm just kidding. I think starting with the problem is really important when we say, okay, we know who our audience is or who it could be, but we still have to understand that like, just because you have something to say to that audience doesn't mean that everybody's going to care. Like, yes, you have your large ICP, but we still have to think within that, who has this specific problem? And if they have it, is it different between this subset and this subset? So understanding the differences across your ICP and who cares about the problem, in what way and why, and how are whatever we're putting out there, how is that solving their problem? So that's going to help us understand, wow, it really doesn't make sense for us with this message, with this offering to approach the audience in this way. So that will really help kind of determine those different subsets. And then when we're thinking about jumping into like actually operationalizing this, we can think through, what are the criteria that makes these people different? What are the criteria between the people who have the problem and care in a different way versus people who have the problem and care, maybe at more of an executive level? So what is the difference between those two? And that will allow us to then see the more technical, like data-driven side of it, to be able to start building those types of lists and segmentation.
I love that. Now, Sidney, without giving away the secret sauce from Refine, you're probably going to bring a pretty interesting perspective here, just knowing that you work at an agency. So how would you go about this?
I actually look at it a little bit differently, shocker. But I kind of go bottoms up. So, right, like if we think about create demand and capture demand, I start with capture demand. That's the easiest, like kind of rinse and repeat. People who are already coming to your website, retargeting, things like those are kind of standard audiences where I actually spend the majority of my time fine tuning, and we'll build like tons of different audiences and see, using metadata or using like in platform or using like another targeting tool if the customer has, certain technology. So that's really where I spend a lot of my time, is ICP, and how within that, how, we don't want to go too wide and just waste a bunch of money. We need to validate our audiences before we scale. And then, more targeted audiences. But in terms of like kind of what you were saying around like mapping that operationally to the problems that they might have. I like to have kind of two different approaches. One, I like to run content that is more like product based, that would have a high reach. Like this is a core problem that 80% of our ICP has or experiences on their team, maybe. And so that's kind of covering a larger majority of our audiences. And then we can dig into specific, maybe features, maybe thought leadership content that's like a little bit more targeted towards persona, something like that, and start then sliding that in. And obviously we do, you know, larger ICP and then also AVM type of stuff. I feel like I should have worn my AVM isn't shirt for this.
We probably are going to be sending some of those out after the event, so we'll make sure you get one of those.
Yeah. But generally that's how I look at it. And that's where a majority of my time is getting new people into the brand. So not even necessarily onto the website, but getting new people to understand the brand and what problems that you solve.